Yeah, okay. This is Jason Peterson, Answers for Hope, and I have Chris McCann and Evan Osborne with me. And Evan, I understand that you have a book in your possession that you had been waiting on getting for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm sure you want to talk about it.
I do. The Forgotten Trinity by Dr. James White. Dr. White is probably, in my opinion, I don't know if you share it with me, probably one of the best apologists around today. He himself is a presuppositional Christian apologist. He defends the Christian faith against all sorts of different religions, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Muslims. One thing that he is passionate about, and if anyone has read any of my articles, watched any of these videos, they know I share his passion, is defending Christian Trinitarianism, the doctrine of the Trinity as it's been revealed in Scripture, as it's been understood through the history of the church. And his book really highlights the biblical arguments specifically for the deity of Christ. And he writes the book not primarily as an apologetic text. He doesn't try to address every single text that brings up the Trinity and every single objection and answering it and all sorts of these things. If you read his introduction, it's quite clear. He's writing this book for the church, for people who don't really understand the Trinity. He wants people to fall in love with God's revelation as triune, as the triune God of Scripture. That is his foremost motive for writing this book. So it's primarily more pastoral and educational than it is apologetic. But really, you'll find it very useful. He dives into serious texts, some that I've already gotten into in the articles regarding the deity of Christ. He does incredible amount of work in explaining and defining what the Trinity is, because if you have clear communication on that, it can be a lot easier to debate and discuss and talk about the Trinity with other people. So it's a great work. Again, The Forgotten Trinity, Dr. James White. Highly recommended. Highly recommended. I think it's actually in our recommended books section.
Yep,
already,
on the website.
So check it out.
Not to buy it from us, just buy it from somewhere. All right, so with that, we're going to talk about some three things today. We're talking about the Kalam Cosmological argument. We're also, Chris had an encounter with an old acquaintance from school that he'd like to tell us about, and then after that, we're going to talk about some of the naturalistic biases that are held within the atheist objections to Christianity, philosophical arguments for God, creationism, those kind of things. So, all right, so the first thing we were going to talk about was the Kalam Cosmological argument. And basically, the Kalam Cosmological argument basically arrives at the conclusion that God exists based off of the universe having to have a beginning. And the way it is that there are three possibilities of why the universe exists. The first one is an eternal universe, and there's both philosophical and scientific problems with that. We'll go with the philosophical problems first. Let's say I had an infinite number of rooms in a hotel, and I rented out half of the rooms. Let's do every even number. Well, I would still have an infinite number of rooms left. But what if I had all the rooms vacant, but then I rented out 3 rooms? I still have an infinite number of rooms left. So what we have here is infinity minus infinity equals infinity, but also infinity minus 3 also equals infinity. Also, you could say too that infinity minus 3 can in some cases equal 3. If you take away all of infinity but 3, you have to basically, in order to get to 3, you have to subtract an infinite amount of numbers. And that just doesn't make sense. Basically though, whenever you try and apply infinity to reality, you just wind up with logical absurdities. So a lot of mathematicians have drawn the conclusion that infinity is nothing more than a concept. It's not actually something that's part of reality. There's also some scientific reasons to believe that the universe did not always exist either. The Born-Guth-Lincoln theorem, they actually did a paper in 2004 about some of the models of the universe, the internal universe, such as the steady-state model, the cosmic egg model, the expansion and contraction, where it does it infinitely, where it's always expanding and contracting, and then also the multiverse. And basically, all these scientists, and mind you, none of them were Christian either, and they all concluded that with all these models, they either just didn't work or they still implied a beginning. Such as the multiverse, which is something that atheists usually run to try and avoid the conclusion of a beginning of the universe, would have to actually have a beginning as well. Never mind the fact that there are different types of multiverse models. So if you want to check out some of the objections to those, I don't have time to go through them right now, but if you want to check some of them out, they're on answersforhope.com. If you look on, just search Kalam Cosmological Argument, little search bar there, and it will probably be on page 3. I think it will be anyway. If it's not, I'm sorry. The second possibility is that the universe came from nothing. Now, as Dr. William Lane Craig would say, the idea of the universe coming from nothing is literally worse than magic. If you have a magician that pulls a rabbit out of his hat, at least you have a magician.
Right.
But to say the universe came from nothing, there's that old proverb, from nothing, nothing comes. It's just nonsensical to think that nothing can cause something, because nothing can't cause anything.
What did Aristotle say?
Nothing is what rocks dream about.
That's great.
And you have to understand, by nothing we mean a literal nothing. Absolute nothing. Nada. Zero. Zilch. And the reason why I'm making this distinction is because a lot of atheists will pull out what I call the Lawrence Cross card and say that nothing in physics is not really nothing. And rather that nothing in physics is more of a quantum vacuum and physical fields. But if it were the case, though, that the universe has always existed on a quantum level, well, first off, we have to understand that the universe, by definition, means everything. Everything in the universe, all energy and matter. Well, quantum activity would be actually part of the universe. So if a vacuum always existed and a physical field always existed, then the universe is actually eternal. And we've already covered some of the philosophical reasons why we can't have an infinite number of past events, because that would just mean that now we have an infinite number of past events on the quantum level, which is not logically tenable either. The third, so if it couldn't have been internal and if it couldn't have come from nothing, then we have a third possibility that's left, and that is that the universe was created by an intelligent being, something outside the universe. But it wouldn't just have to be outside the universe; it actually had to be personable and it had to have sentience, and it would have to the being would also have to be powerful and very knowledgeable, and such a being like that would describe the Christian God.
Right.
All right, Chris. So I understand that you had an interesting conversation with one of our former classmates when you ran into him the other day.
Yeah, basically the other day, I was just out shooting pool with a couple of my friends, and I ran into one of our old classmates, and him and I started catching up, and he keeps up with Jason pretty regularly, and he asked me, he's like, are you in Jason's ministry? I was like, yeah, it's a lot of fun. He goes, oh, so you're a religious guy? I was like, yeah. And we kept on talking, and he said, he told me that he was going into chemistry. Or he's studying chemistry in college right now. I was like, okay, cool, yeah. I'm finishing up, and I told him I'm finishing up my teaching degree, and I'm going to be going into physics. Immediately, right there, he stopped, and he goes, "Wait, you're gonna study physics?" I was like, "Yeah, it's a really cool subject." He goes, "But you're a religious guy." I was like, "Yeah." Apparently it didn't dawn on him that you can study science, and have faith in Jesus at the same time. And apparently this is more prevalent than I apparently thought.
Oh yeah.
I guess because I'm in the apologetics circle.
Yeah, and sometimes even I fall into that trap. I recently had a family member of mine. I brought up the concept of Christian philosophy. They about had a heart attack. They went, "How dare you contradict yourself like that?" It's not a contradiction, it's an actual academic field. And really, I guess it's naturalism monopolizing academia these days that really leads to this ignorance.
Yeah. I mean, it practically blew his mind.
Right.
That a Christian was going to study physics.
I can relate to that. I can.
I'm sorry here, but so I didn't get a chance to witness to him because he's a very strong atheist, I think would be the proper term. But however, I did get to at least plant that little bit in there, So
1 Corinthians chapter 3. Paul planted, Apollos watered, but God made it grow. So
Yeah, and a lot of those kind of reactions come from an ignorance in society.
Well, he wasn't being spiteful.
Well, I just mean but there's an ignorance there though about what science is. And science presupposes something called methodological naturalism, and it's not saying that only nature exists, and it's not saying God doesn't exist. It also doesn't say that God does exist. That's not what science does. Science studies the cause and effects realities of the natural world. It doesn't study truth or anything like that. It does not contradict religion. I had an atheist that I was talking with, and he goes, and he's a biologist, and he goes, well, atheism is just a denial of a claim. It's nothing else. And then he goes on to say, what atheists use a scientific method. So wait a second, I thought it was just a denial of the claim. Now you're telling me how you get knowledge.
Right.
And to say you get knowledge from science is self-contradictory, because science doesn't say anything about knowledge. Science cannot study knowledge. It's something outside of science. So, but science is just to say the natural world, and a lot of people just don't understand that you can be religious and be a scientist, or you can be religious and be a philosopher.
Right.
Dr. William Lane Craig, Alan Plantinga. I mean, there's a bunch of Christian philosophers out there, and a lot of the contribution to philosophy actually comes from Christians. There's not very much happening in the atheist field right now, sad to say, for them. I want to add that in.
It's not too sad for us.
Quick little cheap shot.
I don't know. Dealing with the same objections over and over again, it can get kind of boring.
Right.
But so yeah, if you guys, any atheists are watching, come up with something new, please. But anyway, there's just an ignorance about both philosophy and science, and about what the media is putting out, because the media. The consensus in society. Because a lot of people don't have time to study this stuff. They just hear from other people, and then they parrot it. Kind of like what atheists do with Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett, and
all the other new atheists.
Yeah, I mean, they just parrot it. And a lot of Christians do it too. A lot of Christians parrot what William Lane Craig says. A lot of them parrot what Alan Plantinga says. I got a friend who's a Christian. He loves Alan Plantinga, loves him, and he's always using his arguments against other atheists, and there's nothing wrong with using other people's arguments, but you got to understand them,
right,
when you use them. And I think that a lot of people, including the new atheists, don't understand their own arguments.
Although, yeah, there are Christians who don't either. I've heard bad arguments from Christians.
Oh yeah, I've seen a Christian argue with an atheist and tell an atheist, you can't prove that God doesn't exist. It's an argument from ignorance to say that because you can't prove that God because you can't prove that God doesn't exist, that therefore God exists.
That was deceptive.
But there's also an argument from ignorance to say that there's no evidence for God, therefore He doesn't exist.
Right.
If you say you can't prove that God exists, to my satisfaction, and therefore God doesn't exist, that's an argument for ignorance as well. So it goes both ways. But yeah, I see a lot of Christians using bad logic too. So let's be clear: the ignorance is not just for atheists. There's also a lot of ignorance among Christians too regarding these topics.
And that's why we're here.
Yeah, to try and get this material out so people that want to learn more about this stuff can study it. The last thing we wanted to cover, and Chris, I think you wanted to start this one off. The bias a lot of the bias that atheists put whenever they're considering the supernatural and everything. That I guess you can call it naturalistic presuppositional bias.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I want to start this one off is because I honestly thoroughly understand why. Because basically people who are naturalists, or people who have a naturalistic bias, they're going by the definition of science. The definition of science as it is defined today is the study of the natural world.
Right.
Therefore, it cannot have a supernatural input. Mm-hmm. So basically, by the definition, it has to be purely naturalistic. But however, that by that definition, it cannot make claims about things that are supernatural.
Right.
Okay, so if it's going to say, okay, well, God doesn't exist, well, and they're saying science has proven it, well, they can't say that because you're using naturalistic means on a supernatural entity. So I completely and thoroughly understand why they claim that like things like evolution or universal common descent is science. I understand that because it has to have a naturalistic explanation. But at the same time, they need to be careful about which ground they're treading on, or else they're going outside the realm of science, and then they're saying science has proven this. Yeah.
Okay. And Chris is right. There is a common misunderstanding about science, and that is that science somehow has shown that the supernatural is not needed or that doesn't exist, and that's simply, as I said earlier, not the case. Science is only to study the natural world. That's what it is by definition. So science cannot study, confirm, or deny that the supernatural does exist. Science doesn't know, and nor does it care.
Right.
But a lot of atheists though will say, well, atheism is denial of a claim, and then they'll go on to say, well, atheists use the scientific method. Well, if it's all just a denial of a claim, then why are you trying to say how atheists come about trying to solve things? And not just that, but the scientific method is by no means limited to just atheists. Christians pioneered science in the Western world. So there were a lot of devout Christians that were scientists. There's also been some devoted Hindus and Muslims that were scientists. You can't just say that only atheists can use science. That's absurd.
Yeah, we have many Muslims to thank for mathematics, especially.
Absolutely. So being religious is not that does not shun people away from science unless you're trying to tell people that science opposes religion. That is a dogma that will drive religious people away from science.
Yeah.
And it's working, sadly.
And it's working. But ever since that mantra has come up, there's been less religious people that want to go on the science because they don't want to go and listen to something they disagree with. And atheists don't like it either. So, I'm sure some of you atheists cringe when you hear me talk. I cringe when I hear David Silverman talk. So, just a matter of fact, a lot of people really don't like listening to people they disagree with. I don't really like to do it either, but I have to because this is the field I'm in. And I need to know what my atheist opponents are saying about my faith and about me, in fact.
What makes it kind of fun though is when you study apologetics, you can point out the inconsistencies left and right. Jason can read like a 50-page article and be like, you were wrong. He's being consistent here, and here. Oh, you lied there. That's just what it is. Now, John Lennox, he debated a chemist. I think the chemist also worked over at Oxford, and the chemist was adamant. Very adamant. You can watch the debate. It's on YouTube. That religious people cannot do science.
Isaac Newton would beg to differ.
Right.
But okay.
But no, he was telling left and right. John Lennox was telling him, like, of course you can do science.
John Lennox is a scientist. He's a mathematician.
Yeah, no, and that just blew my mind. I mean, this is a PhD chemist. And he's sitting there saying that religious people cannot perform science.
Sadly, a lot of PhDs are very ignorant about science.
And I think it's sad. I was actually talking to someone at church about this on Sunday. I was talking about the fact that the church has really lost its zeal for the academic aspect of our faith. Now, don't get me wrong, there's an experiential aspect to the Christian faith. There is a worship that is to be lively. There is a life that is to be lived in obedience. I'm not saying we're not to live vibrantly in our faith, but there is an intellectual aspect to it. Romans 12:2 of all passages, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There is a mind that's going on, that's working. We have a rationality in the Scriptures. As someone who studied Scripture, I find that when you're comparing text with text, you have to employ sometimes some pretty heavy reasoning to get some text fitting with one another. I've driven myself, to just pulling my hair out trying to get an understanding of the text, because some of them are deep, and it takes thinking to get into the understanding of the text. And we are to have a faith that thinks deeply. And no, you don't have to be a scholar, but think your faith through. And I was talking to this person at church about this. Really started about the time of the Enlightenment, really.
Yeah.
As soon as you had more naturalistic, deistic, non-revelatory worldviews coming into play, which says there's either no God for revelation, or there is a God, but he hasn't revealed anything to humanity. The truth of Scripture is thrown out. Any form of revelation is thrown out. We have this almost naturalistic view of science, of philosophy. You have a complete takeover. And I think the church, not being trained enough in the greater populace to respond, just retreated. Well, if science doesn't support Scripture, well, we're going to leave science. Well, we're going to leave philosophy. And that's sad.
Oh, yeah.
And you do have many compromises in the church because of it. You do have many problems. And it's still around today. There are Christians who are anti-intellectual. And
that's right.
That's why I think it's great that you have philosophers like Richard Swinburne, William Lane Craig, Alvin Plantinga, these Christian philosophers moving into this field, bringing it out. You have your creation scientists really taking force in the scientific community as well. So I see a resurgence.
And there's a lot of
And that's
atheists.
encouraging.
Too. There's a lot of atheists too that are. There are a lot of most philosophers are atheists. We do know that, but there are a lot of atheists that I discuss
Really?
with that hate philosophy. They hate it. Why? Because they want to just talk about the natural world. They don't want to consider anything outside of nature that exists. A lot of the people, like if you go go on Facebook and go on all you gotta do is just go to an atheist page and see that the atheists only want to talk about the natural world. They don't want to talk about anything outside the universe. They just flat out deny that there's anything beyond nature. That's called ontological naturalism or metaphysical naturalism. It's a form of naturalism that says only nature exists. And there's also another part of naturalism that usually goes in hand with it called epistemological naturalism, where knowledge can only be derived from nature. Well, it turns out that the fact that only nature exists is not a claim that's derived from nature.
Right.
So it's really self-defeating. Both of them are. There are all kinds of things that exist independently in nature. We have the laws of logic. We have abstract objects like numbers. We have moral values that exist apart from nature that are prescriptive and binding. We have God. I'm sure they'll object to that one.
Right.
There's love, beauty, all these things that science cannot study. If only nature exists, then science should be able to study anything. Turns out that by definition, since science only studies the natural world, it can't. If love was part of the natural world, then science could study it. Science can't study it.
And also, to go off of what you were saying, I forgot what book and verse it was, but it says, "Study to find yourself approved." At the
Second
time.
Timothy.
2 Timothy 2:15.
Yep.
So even the Bible is saying, don't be a stupid ignoramus.
And that was to a young man, Timothy, young Jewish man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Thomas
God wants you to actually
Right.
go out there and study. Go out there and learn about the world.
And there's some Christians out there that are heavily against it. Mark Verkler,
Right.
for instance, who has a DVD called and it talks about how by closing your eyes and imagining yourself on the beach, you can talk to God.
That guy.
Yeah, I just
Well, really the basis behind us studying to show ourselves approved, it's found in the passage itself, 2 Timothy 2:15. Why are we doing this? To make ourselves a workman, to get us going in the labor of what? Proclaiming the gospel,
Absolutely.
reaching the souls, doing the work that he's given us to do. And what does that entail? What does this workmanship entail? Rightly dividing the word of truth, or correctly handling the word of truth. And that comes through study.
A lot of study.
Yep.
I'm probably going to be studying till the day I die.
Oh, yeah.
Because
You'll live longer because of it unless you get hit by a bus or something.
Colossians 1:10, we're to continue to grow in the knowledge of the Lord.
Yep.
Continue.
Yeah, so I'll probably be studying until my deathbed.
I would hope so.
Because there's just way too much out there to learn, just in the scientific field
Right.
alone.
Oh, yeah.
And
I think each one of the fields we get involved in,
And the funny thing about science is for every model, there's like 10 more models for the same thing.
Yeah, no.
And-
I've been briefly brushing over the string theory, nuclear theory, kinetic theory, and all those things. Oh man,
Right.
it was mind blowing.
I got a Physics for Dummies book on the bottom shelf there. But yeah, but the funny thing about science too is that science isn't a certain process. It works to falsify things, and a lot of models end up getting falsified because that's just how science works. That's how it's supposed to work.
Right.
There are a couple of things in science right now that should be falsified that haven't been, but but like for instance, especially when you get into quantum physics, there are over 19 interpretations of quantum physics. And whenever I see atheists try to get out of the beginning of the universe, they'll always appear to quantum physics. It's like quantum physics is a buzzword for them. It's like the I'm smart card, quantum physics. I can say it, I can spell it. I know what I'm talking about. But let me tell you something, guys. If you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics. Because no one does. I don't understand quantum physics. Alexander von Lincoln does not understand quantum physics. There's a lot about quantum physics we don't know. And that's okay. That's what science does. We're trying to figure it out. But and the reason why I say this is because I see a lot of atheists that bring up naturalistic models to try and get out of things like how life began, how the universe began to exist. They try and come up with naturalistic explanations for this phenomena, and they'll pull up models that have problems with them, and they'll deny that the models have problems, and they'll try and argue that the models are completely perfect when there's 10 other competing models there. So really, the atheist has really no shortage of possible objections they can raise because there's a bunch of old models out there that they could appeal to. I said earlier that no one really mentions the steady state theory. Well, that's true, but I did have one And you can see it on Facebook when I debated him. He actually tried to appeal to the steady state theory, which actually completely contradicts the Big Bang.
Right.
So there are a lot of models out there that they can. But one thing that's interesting is when you see atheists using these models, they'll tend to blend opposing models together. They try and form some sort of hypothesis to justify their worldview. It's once you learn what these models are, you can kind of see it. Like I had an atheist that tried to say that that the universe is always expanded and contracted, and he tried to use a multiverse with it. And he was trying to say there's a multiverse, and it's just been an infinite number of expansions and contractions. And he mentioned he mentioned parallel dimensions, and he also mentioned the bubble universe, the bubble multiverse, and just all these theories together just don't fit together. So to try and get out of the idea that the universe began to exist, it's just absurd. So Christians, whenever you see an atheist talk about quantum physics, the first question you should ask them: what interpretation of quantum physics do you adhere to? Do you adhere to the Copenhagen interpretation? Perhaps you appeal to the many worlds interpretations of quantum physics. There's 19 of them. Ask them which one there is, and anytime they deviate from that interpretation, point it out. And that will stop them from doing that pretty quickly.
Okay.
So, we about done, or you guys have anything else to add?
No, that actually is going to be a pretty short episode today.
What episode is it anyway? I don't even...
6.
Don't forget Dr. White's book.
Yeah, Dr. White. Yeah. Dr. White, we want royalties. We just advertised you. Not that he's watching.
Available on our website.
Not that he's watching.
Right.
He's not.
He's a very busy man.
He is a busy man.
Very busy man.
That's okay. Let's be one of those unsaid good deeds.
What's that?
Let's be one of those unspoken good deeds.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so this is episode 6, and stay tuned for episode 7.